What would you do if you heard a cry in the middle of the wild, a cry so sharp that it pierced the silence of the jungle? Was it the wind moving through the trees, or was it the voice of a creature in deep pain? That morning the forest looked calm, but nothing was calm inside it. The air felt heavy, and the cries grew louder with every second, echoing between the tall trees and rolling down into the valley. A fossa mother stood near the edge of a muddy river, her body trembling, her eyes locked on the swirling water below. In the water, her tiny cub fought for its life, slipping again and again into the current. The mother let out a desperate growl, pacing back and forth, as if searching for a way to save her baby, but too afraid to leap in. The cub's paws splashed against the surface, its squeals carrying far into the forest, and it seemed every sound begged for someone, anyone, to come. Birds circled above, their wings cutting through the sky, but they offered no help. The water was too strong, pulling the small cub toward the deeper side. The mother's cries grew sharper, almost human-like, as if she was calling for someone beyond the animal world. But who could answer her? Who would step into that danger when even the strongest of animals stayed back? At the same time, not far away, a man walked the narrow forest path. He was used to the wilderness, but when he stopped and listened, his heart raced. That sound. It's not the usual call, he whispered to himself, stepping closer toward the cries. The man's eyes narrowed as he reached the riverbank, and what he saw froze him in place. A wild fossa cub drowning, a mother standing helpless on the edge. The man clenched his fists and took a deep breath. He knew one wrong move could make the mother attack him, but doing nothing meant the cub would sink any moment. The jungle held its breath as man and beast locked eyes for the first time. The fossa mother growled, her sharp teeth flashing, but she did not attack. She just stood there, torn between fear of the human and fear of losing her cub forever. The man's heartbeat quickened. If I go in now, will she let me? Or will this be the end of me too? His shoes pressed into the mud, the cries of the cub still stabbing the air. Time was running out, and every passing second felt heavier than the last. The man's breath grew shallow as he stood at the muddy bank, staring into the wild scene unfolding before him. The cub thrashed weakly in the water, its tiny body barely above the surface, each cry weaker than the last. The mother's growls cut through the air like a warning bell, yet her paws stayed rooted to the ground. Her instinct screamed at her to jump in, but the current was too strong, the mud too deep. She was powerful, but not powerful enough to fight this raging water. The man knew that if he did nothing, the cub had only minutes left. But if he dared step closer, he might face the fury of a desperate mother. He crouched low, his voice soft but trembling. "Easy now. I don't mean harm," he muttered under his breath, unsure if the animal understood, yet hoping his tone carried peace. The fossa's amber eyes locked on him, her teeth bared, her tail swishing violently as though warning him to stay away. For a moment, it looked as though she might pounce. The man froze, his body tense, but then something unexpected happened. The mother didn't lunge forward. Instead, she let out a cry so sorrowful it sounded less like rage and more like pleading. It was as if she was asking him, a stranger from another world, to help her child. The man's hands shook as he slid one foot into the wet mud. His shoes sank instantly, pulling him down, and he had to grip a nearby root to keep his balance. The cub's cries weakened again, bubbles forming around its mouth as the water swallowed it deeper. No, hold on!" The man whispered urgently, his heart racing faster. He took another cautious step, the mud clutching his legs like hands trying to drag him under. The fossa mother prowled along the edge, pacing wildly, her eyes darting between the cub and the man. Her growls softened, turning into sharp whimpers, and in that moment he realized she was allowing him to try. Just as he leaned forward, reaching his arm toward the cub, a sudden splash broke the surface. A long, sleek shape darted beneath the water, something alive, something hunting. The man's eyes widened. God, no, not now. He recognized the shadow immediately, a Nile monitor lizard, massive and predatory, drawn by the helpless movements of the drowning cub. The cub squealed in panic, its tiny claws flailing in the water, while the lizard circled closer, its head bobbing above the current for a split second before sliding back under. The man's chest tightened. The cub was not only drowning, it was about to become prey. Adrenaline surged through him. Without another thought, he lunged forward, both hands gripping the slippery bank as he lowered himself toward the water. The current tugged at his legs, threatening to sweep him in, but he forced his body down, stretching his arm as far as it could go. "Come on, little one, come on!" His fingers grazed the cub's soaked fur. The cub squealed again, snapping its small jaws in panic, but then the current pushed it further away. The man gritted his teeth, his muscles straining as he reached deeper, nearly plunging in head first. Behind him, the fossa mother let out a scream unlike anything he had ever heard, a mixture of rage, fear, and urgency. It rattled his bones. She jumped closer to the bank, her body shaking, her eyes wild, yet she still held back from attacking him. For a brief second, he felt as if she trusted him, or maybe she had no choice. Then a violent splash erupted. The monitor lunged toward the cub, its jaws snapping shut with a terrifying crack. The cub cried in terror, thrashing desperately, just inches away from the predator's teeth. "No, not today," the man shouted, his voice echoing through the forest. Without thinking, he plunged both arms into the water, grabbing the cub in one hand and shoving against the lizard's snout with the other. The creature hissed, its sharp claws cutting across the man's forearm as it writhed in the water. Pain shot through him, but he held on, pulling the cub free from the current. Mud splattered as he scrambled backward, the cub pressed tightly to his chest. The lizard thrashed wildly, snapping its jaws, but the man managed to crawl back onto the bank. His arm burned with fresh wounds, blood trickling down to his fingertips, but the cub squirmed in his grip, alive, coughing out water in tiny gasps. The mother froze, her muscles coiled tight as a spring. Her eyes locked on the man holding her cub. This was the moment he feared. Would she see him as a savior or as a thief? She snarled, stepping closer, her fangs glinting in the light. The man's chest rose and fell rapidly, his arms shaking as he held out the cub. "Take her. She's yours," he said in a broken voice, pushing the cub gently forward onto the muddy ground. The cub squeaked weakly, trying to crawl toward its mother. For a tense second, the mother did not move. Her growl vibrated in the air, sharp and warning. Then with a sudden leap, she rushed forward, snatching the cub in her jaws. The man flinched, expecting an attack, but the mother darted backward, cradling her baby carefully. She licked its wet fur, her growls softening into low rumbles of relief. The cub pressed close to her chest, safe once more. The man collapsed backward into the mud, breathing hard, his arm throbbing from the lizard's claws. His chest heaved, sweat dripping down his face. He wanted to smile, but before relief could sink in, he heard it, the sharp rustle of movement in the bushes behind him. He froze, turning his head slowly. Eyes, two glowing eyes staring at him through the shadows. Then another pair, and another. His blood ran cold. It was not the fossa mother. These were hyenas. 3 of them. Their bodies slinked from the cover of the trees, their grins wide, their steps slow and deliberate. They had smelled the blood in the air, the man's blood, and the scent of the weakened cub. The mother hissed, pulling her cub close, her fur bristling as she growled at the new danger. The man's body stiffened. His mind screamed, "Not now! Not after everything!" The hyenas cackled, their chilling laughter echoing through the forest as they circled closer. One of them fixed its eyes on the man, another on the fossa mother, and the third crept lower toward the cub. The man pushed himself up, ignoring the pain in his arm, his breath ragged. He scanned the ground desperately for a stick, a rock, anything he could use. His fingers closed around a broken branch, half buried in the mud. He raised it, his voice trembling but firm. "Stay back!" The hyenas paused, their heads tilting, their laughter softening into eerie grunts. The mother crouched low, ready to defend her cub, her growls louder than ever. For the first time, Man and beast stood side by side, both protecting the same fragile life against a new enemy. The jungle was no longer silent. It was alive with tension, every heartbeat louder than the last, and yet, deep in his chest, the man wondered, could he and the Fossa mother hold their ground together? Or was this the beginning of an even greater fight for survival? The man tightened his grip on the broken branch, his knuckles white, his breathing uneven. The three hyenas crept closer, their paws pressing into the mud, their eyes glowing with cruel hunger. Their laughter echoed again, low and mocking, as though they were toying with both him and the Fossa. The mother Fossa crouched lower to the ground, her cub pressed beneath her chest, her body trembling yet steady, her amber eyes locked on the nearest hyena. The forest air grew heavier, so silent that even the distant birds had gone quiet, as if nature itself waited to see what would happen next. The man's arm burned with pain where the lizard had clawed him, but he ignored it. His focus was split on the hyenas circling on the trembling cub, and on the mother who snarled beside him. It was a strange and dangerous alliance, man and beast standing together, not out of choice, but out of necessity. One wrong move could mean death, but hesitation could mean the cub's end. He whispered to himself, voice shaky, "Not today. I've come too far for this to end now." The first hyena stepped closer, its head lowered, saliva dripping from its mouth. The man swung the branch hard through the air, striking the mud with a sharp crack. The hyena stopped, startled for a second, then let out a cackle that was joined by the others. They were not afraid, they were amused. The man's heart pounded faster. He shouted, voice rough with desperation, "Back! Back off!" His voice echoed, but the predators only advanced more cautiously, tightening the circle. Then, unexpectedly, the mother Fossa leaped forward, her claws flashing as she swiped at the nearest hyena. The animal yelped and jumped back, surprised by her sudden ferocity. She landed gracefully, growling louder, her tail lashing wildly. The cub squealed behind her, terrified, but safe for the moment. The man felt a surge of adrenaline watching her bravery. He raised the branch higher, stepping forward as well, the mud sucking at his feet. But before relief could settle, a fourth hyena slinked out from the shadows. Then a fifth. The man's throat tightened. 5 hyenas now circled them, their laughter rising into a chorus that chilled his bones. He realized he was outnumbered, and even with the mother's strength, they had little chance if the pack attacked all at once. His eyes darted desperately around the forest floor for something stronger than a branch. But there was nothing but mud, roots, and stones too small to matter. One of the hyenas lunged suddenly, aiming not for the man but for the cub. The mother sprang in front of it, her teeth sinking into the hyena's shoulder. A savage struggle broke out, snarls and growls echoing through the forest. The man shouted in panic, swinging his branch wildly to keep the others back. He struck one across the muzzle and it yelped, staggering back. But the others didn't stop. They only grew bolder. The cub's cries pierced the air, high-pitched and desperate. The mother held on to the attacking hyena, shaking her head violently, but she was smaller than her enemy. The hyena snapped its jaws and dragged her sideways, trying to throw her off. The man knew if he didn't act, she would be overwhelmed. Without thinking, he lunged forward, driving the branch down hard against the hyena's flank. The impact was strong enough to make it release its grip. The mother scrambled free, her fur bristling, her chest heaving as she returned to guard her cub. But the man had made a mistake. He had stumbled too close. Another hyena charged from behind, ramming him with its shoulder. He crashed into the mud, the branch flying from his hand. Pain shot through his ribs as the predator loomed over him, jaws wide, teeth glistening. He pushed against its snout with both hands, struggling to keep its teeth from closing around his face. The weight of the animal pressed down, its hot breath filling his nostrils, its growl vibrating through his chest. Not like this." He gasped, straining with every ounce of strength. The Fossa mother, still bleeding from her fight, suddenly darted forward. With a fierce snarl, she leapt onto the hyena's back, her claws raking across its neck. The predator shrieked in pain and twisted wildly, throwing her off, but it gave the man the opening he needed. He shoved hard, rolling away and scrambling toward the lost branch. His fingers closed around it, his chest heaving, his vision blurred with sweat and fear. He forced himself back up, shouting with rage, as he swung the branch with all his might at the hyena's head. The crack echoed, and the predator staggered back, dazed. The pack regrouped, circling again, their laughter dimming into low growls. They had been surprised by the resistance, but hunger still burned in their eyes. The man knew this standoff could not last much longer. His arms trembled, his body weak from blood loss and exhaustion. The mother fossa panted heavily, her fur streaked with mud and blood, yet her eyes still blazed with determination. The cub whimpered, pressing into the ground, too weak to move. Then, from the distance, another sound cut through the tension. A deep, heavy roar. The hyenas froze, their ears twitching, their eyes darting nervously toward the trees. The man's breath caught in his throat. Another predator. He turned his head slowly, his stomach sinking. Emerging from the shadows was a massive lion, its mane thick and golden, its eyes sharp as blades. The hyenas instantly backed away, their laughter replaced with uneasy growls. They knew better than to challenge a lion. But the man's relief was short-lived. A lion was no savior. A lion was danger of another kind. Its powerful body moved gracefully, yet each step shook the earth. Its eyes locked not on the hyenas, but on the fossa cub. The man's pulse raced wildly. He whispered in disbelief, "No, not you too." He glanced at the mother fossa, whose growls deepened into sharp hisses, her body low to the ground, prepared to fight. But what could she do against a lion? What could he do? The hyenas slinked back, watching eagerly, ready to snatch whatever was left after the lion made its move. The lion stopped a few feet away, its golden eyes flicking from the cub to the man, then to the mother. It let out another roar, so deep it rattled the trees, and the jungle seemed to bow in silence. The man gripped his branch tighter, though he knew it was useless. "Still," he whispered, "if it's me or them, you'll have to go through me first." His voice cracked. But his stance did not falter. For a moment that felt endless. Man, lion, fossa, and hyenas stood locked in a deadly standoff. The cub whimpered softly, and that single sound broke the silence. The lion lowered its head, muscles coiling, preparing to strike. But then a new noise thundered across the forest, the sound of rushing water. The man turned his head sharply. Upstream, the river swelled higher, foam frothing as a sudden surge of floodwater rushed down. A flash flood. His stomach dropped. The entire bank was about to be swallowed. The hyenas yelped in alarm and scattered instantly, disappearing into the forest. The lion snarled, reluctant to retreat, but even it turned sharply, leaping back into the trees as the water barreled closer. The mother fossa clutched her cub tightly, her eyes wide with terror. The man spun around, searching for a way out, but the river was rising too fast. "Move, move now!" he shouted. Though his words were lost in the roar of the flood, the ground shook as the torrent of muddy water crashed forward, swallowing roots, trees, and rocks in its path. The man grabbed the fossa mother by instinct, not to restrain but to guide, and bolted toward higher ground. She snarled at his touch, but then she saw the rushing wall of water and ran with him, clutching her cub in her jaws. Side by side they sprinted through the mud, every step a desperate fight against the sucking ground. Behind them, the flood tore through the riverbank, devouring everything in its way. Branches snapped like brittle bones, and the roar of the water drowned out every other sound. The man's lungs burned, his legs heavy, but he forced himself to keep moving. The mother fossa leapt ahead, agile even with the cub in her jaws, glancing back only once to see if the strange human was still with her. For the briefest moment her eyes softened. Not trust, but something close. They scrambled onto a rocky slope just as the flood slammed into the place they had stood. Muddy water surged past, violent and unstoppable, sweeping away the branch the man had fought with, sweeping away even the scent of hyenas. The jungle shuddered, alive with chaos. The man collapsed to his knees, chest heaving, his body shaking from exhaustion. The mother fossa placed her cub down beside her, licking it quickly, her body still tense, her ears pricked for danger. But the danger was not gone. The flood had changed the land, isolating them on a rocky rise surrounded by rushing water. The forest was no longer familiar. Paths had vanished. The man wiped blood and sweat from his face, his eyes scanning the wild scene. "We're trapped," he muttered, his voice heavy. The cub whimpered softly, and the mother curled around it protectively. The night was not far. And in the wild, night brought hunters even more dangerous than those they had faced. The man sat on the rocky slope, his chest rising and falling like a drum beaten too fast. His breath came in short bursts, his arms heavy, and the wounds on his forearm burned every time the evening wind touched them. Below, the river had become a raging monster, its muddy waves slamming against broken trees and dragging entire branches downstream. What had once been a calm stretch of forest was now an angry sea, cutting them off from every familiar path. The man rubbed his face with a muddy hand, his voice barely a whisper. "We're not safe here. Not at all." The mother fossa crouched low beside her cub, her body wrapped around the tiny creature like a shield. The cub whimpered weakly, still exhausted from nearly drowning, its chest rising in shallow breaths. The mother's amber eyes never left the shadows of the forest that loomed behind them. She knew as well as the man did, the river had not ended their danger. It had only trapped them together in a smaller battlefield. Night was falling, and with it predators would come. The man pulled himself upright, swaying for a moment before steadying on his legs. He scanned the rocky rise, his mind racing. "I need fire. I need a way to keep them away." His eyes darted around, but the flood had taken everything. No dry wood, no shelter, no food. Only rocks, slick with mud, and the endless roar of the water below. He pressed his palm against his bleeding arm, hissing at the sting. He could feel weakness creeping in, but giving up was not an option. Not when the cub's faint cries reminded him that a fragile life depended on more than the mother's strength alone. The forest around them grew darker. The last light of day bled across the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of orange and purple. Soon, the jungle would belong to night hunters. The man bent low, whispering, "If I don't find a way to protect us, we're finished." A sudden sound cracked through the air, a distant howl. Then another, closer this time. The man stiffened. Jackals, his stomach twisted. He knew the river had not just trapped them, it had drawn attention. The noise of the flood, the scent of blood, the cries of the cub. Predators heard everything, and predators never wasted an opportunity. The mother fossa lifted her head sharply, her ears twitching. A low growl rumbled in her throat and her tail lashed across the mud. She could smell it too. The man's grip on the broken branch tightened, though it was barely more than a stick now, battered and splintered. He muttered, "Damn it, not again." From the edge of the trees, two shapes appeared. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, their movements quick and cautious. Jackals were smaller than hyenas, but they were clever, and they hunted in numbers. The man's breath quickened as he scanned the shadows beyond them. More pairs of eyes flickered in the darkness. At least 4, maybe 5. The jackals didn't rush forward, not yet. They crept in slow arcs, testing, watching, sniffing the air. The man shouted, swinging his stick in a wide motion, "Back off!" His voice cracked against the roar of the river, but the jackals only flinched for a second before continuing their slow circle. The cubs squealed again, weak and frightened. That sound changed everything. The jackals perked up, their ears twitching, their eyes locking onto the tiny creature. The mother fossa stood over her cub, her body arched, her growls rising into piercing screeches that cut through the night. But the jackals didn't back down. They were patient. They knew the cub was weak. They knew the man was bleeding. They knew the mother was tired. Then another twist of fate struck. A cold drop landed on the man's cheek. He looked up. Clouds gathered above, heavy and black, swallowing the last glow of twilight. Within moments, rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder, drumming against the rocks and washing fresh mud down the slope. The jackal's eyes glimmered in the rain as they spread wider, their coats slick, their hunger sharper. The man's heart raced. The rain would make fire impossible. The darkness would grow deeper. His grip tightened on the stick, though he knew it wasn't enough. "We're surrounded," he whispered. Suddenly one jackal darted forward, snapping its jaws just inches from the cub before darting back. The mother lunged after it, but the others moved in from the side. The man shouted, swinging wildly at one, striking it across the shoulder. The jackal yelped but did not retreat far. They were testing, wearing them down. Another snapped at the man's leg, and he kicked it away, stumbling back on the slick rock. His vision blurred for a second from exhaustion, but he forced himself to stand tall, panting, rain mixing with sweat and blood on his face. The cub cried louder, a thin, desperate sound. That sound made the jackals reckless. Two of them rushed at once, one aiming for the cub, the other for the man. The mother fossa sprang with ferocity, biting into the first and dragging it away from her child. The man swung his branch with all his strength, striking the second across the muzzle. The stick snapped in half with the impact, leaving him with nothing but a jagged piece. His eyes widened in horror. Now he was nearly unarmed. The jackals regrouped, circling tighter, their growls louder, their bodies weaving in and out of the rain. The man's chest rose and fell heavily. He knew they couldn't keep this up forever. Something had to give, and then another sound rose above the rain. A deep, steady hum, almost mechanical. The man's eyes widened as he turned his head. Far across the swollen river, through the sheets of rain, a light flickered. Faint at first, then clearer. A flashlight. Someone was out there. A voice echoed faintly, lost in the storm. Human voices. The man's chest tightened with both relief and dread. Rescue or danger of a different kind? The mother fossa turned her head too, her ears twitching at the unfamiliar noise. Her eyes glimmered with both fear and confusion. She didn't know what it meant, but she knew change was coming. The jackals paused, their heads snapping toward the strange sound. For a moment the circle broke. They hesitated, ears twitching, growls softening. The man seized the moment, stepping forward with a shout, his broken stick raised high. "Go!" His voice cracked but carried through the storm. The jackals backed off slightly, their eyes still locked on the cub, but their focus wavered. The rain poured harder, thunder rolling across the sky. The flood below roared louder, carrying branches and debris through the valley. The flashlight flickered again on the far bank. A faint call carried over the storm, but the man couldn't make out the words. His pulse raced. Whoever was out there, hunter, rescuer, or stranger, they had seen the light of their small fight. The mother fossa snarled low, pressing her cub close. The man's grip on the broken stick trembled. The jackals lingered in the rain, torn between their hunger and their fear of the new disturbance. The jungle seemed to hold its breath, balanced on the edge of something unknown. The man whispered almost to himself, "Please, let it be help, please." But deep inside, he knew the wild never made anything easy. The flashlight's glow grew stronger, voices grew louder, and the night was far from over. The rain hammered down harder, the thunder shaking the valley, and the broken stick slipped in the man's hands as his strength weakened. Across the river, the flashlight beam swayed again, but this time something else happened. A gunshot cracked through the storm. The man froze. The jackals scattered into the forest, vanishing like shadows. The mother fossa jerked her head toward the sound, her growl turning into a sharp hiss. The man's stomach dropped. Not rescuers. The hunters. Two more flashlights appeared across the bank, beams cutting wildly through the darkness. Voices shouted over the flood. The words were unclear, but the sound was harsh, commanding. These were men who searched not to save, but to take. Perhaps they had heard rumors of the fossa, or perhaps they simply wanted to seize anything trapped by the storm. In the wilderness, the line between rescuer and predator was thin. The man looked at the mother fossa, her body trembling yet fierce as she shielded her cub. His heart clenched. He had fought hyenas, floods, and jackals, but this was different. Against nature he had struggled for survival. Against humans with greed in their eyes, he knew he couldn't fight alone. Another gunshot split the night, the bullet tearing into a tree near the river's edge. The hunters were testing, firing to drive anything living out of hiding. The man crouched low, pressing himself against the slick rock. He knew they couldn't cross yet. The river was too wild. But when dawn came and the waters calmed, the hunters would find a way. The mother Fossa's amber eyes locked with his. In them he didn't see just fear. He saw trust, silent, unspoken trust. The cub whimpered beneath her, tiny and fragile. And in that moment, the man realized something powerful. The wild was not cruel, not truly. It was humans who made cruelty. The wild was only honest, life or death, strength or weakness. But humans twisted that balance for greed. His chest heaved as he whispered, "I won't let them take you." The rain began to ease, though the river still foamed and roared. Slowly, the man ripped a strip from his shirt, wrapping his bleeding arm tighter. He gritted his teeth, forcing his body to move to fight the weakness. He began gathering flat rocks, stacking them against the slope, building a crude barrier. The mother Fossa watched him, ears flicking, but did not stop him. Somehow she understood they were not enemies. Not anymore. Through the night, the man worked, piling stones, digging mud, shaping what little shelter he could. The mother stood guard, snarling at every movement in the shadows. The cub nestled closer to her, its tiny chest rising and falling. Together, man and beast prepared for what dawn might bring. And when morning finally broke, the storm faded and mist curled over the valley. Something unexpected happened. Across the river, the hunters were gone. Their flashlights had vanished, their voices silenced. The river must have swelled further in the night, cutting off their approach. Or perhaps the jungle itself had swallowed them. Whatever the reason, danger had slipped away with the darkness. The man stared at the empty bank, his chest tightening with relief. He turned to the mother Fossa, who still stood watch. For the first time, her body relaxed. She nuzzled her cub gently, then lifted her gaze back to the man. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. Two creatures from different worlds, bound together by the same fight for survival. Then, with a flick of her tail, the mother nudged her cub forward. The little one stumbled, weak but alive, its paws touching the wet stone. She gave the man one last glance, not of fear, not of threat, but of something deeper, acknowledgement. And then she led her cub away, disappearing into the jungle mist. The man sat back against the rocks, his body trembling, his arm throbbing, but a faint smile broke across his face. He had protected them, and they had protected him. They had survived, not because of strength alone, but because in their darkest hour, they had chosen trust over fear, and that was the lesson he carried as the jungle quieted around him. Survival is not about being the strongest, but about knowing when to fight, when to endure, and when to trust. In the wild and in life, true strength is found in unity, not in isolation. The storm had tested them, the predators had hunted them, and even humans had threatened them. But in the end, man and beast had stood together. That fragile bond, formed in the heart of chaos, had been enough to defy the night. The man rose slowly, his eyes scanning the fading mist. Somewhere out there, the mother Fossa and her cub were alive, their story continuing deep within the forest. He tightened the cloth around his arm, steadying himself. His own journey was far from over, but for the first time in days, he felt something powerful surge through him, hope. And as the first golden light of morning broke through the clouds, casting its glow across the scarred landscape, the man whispered to himself, "The wild gives back what we give it. Respect or destruction? Today I chose respect." With that, he turned toward the jungle path, ready to walk forward, carrying the memory of the night forever within him. The story ends here, where man and nature are no longer enemies, but allies bound by survival, trust, and an unspoken promise that life, no matter how fragile, is worth protecting.